Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Courtside with Beilinson Tennis, part of the Tennis Channel Podcast Network. As always, one of our favorite episodes of the year-end segment. We have with us great friend and day one supporter of the show, David Zakoden, along with my co-host and Hall of Famer, Steve Flink. Join in, boys. It's been another year. It's been another great year. A lot to discuss. We're going to try to keep this under an hour. We respect all the viewers' times. David and Steve, you guys ready to go?
Absolutely. This is one of my favorite segments that you guys do all year, and always an honor to join both of you to talk about the season.
Yeah, it's
Steve, you
going to be
ready?
fun. It's going to be fun. I know we got a lot of pertinent topics to cover.
Yeah, we're going to talk the good. We're going to talk the bad. We're going to talk some stuff in between too. We'll start with some noteworthy, probably most noteworthy item in the offseason. We'll start with the topic of coaching changes, and first being Novak Djokovic and Andy Murray. David, I'll let you start off. Your thoughts on Novak and Andy?
It's one of those things where when I first heard the news, I was shocked and surprised, but then simultaneously after the fact, not super surprised because of how much sense I think this makes for Novak at this stage of his career. And I think with what we heard after the fact that Murray was sort of in high demand in terms of coaching opportunities after he had officially stepped away from the tour last summer. I think it's going to be a perfect mesh. I think it's going to provide Novak with some of the hunger that he is striving for in 2025. And ultimately, I think there's a lot that Murray can probably help tactically, particularly in the later rounds of these tournaments where Novak is going up against these top 10 guys that have played him quite a bit, know some of the ins and outs. I think Murray's going to add a lot of value to his game.
Steve?
Yeah, I see it essentially the same way as David. I mean, I wasn't that shocked, though I have to say, because Djokovic is an out of the box thinker. So to me, it made immediate sense. And I also think people underestimated how much these two guys respected each other. You can be fierce rivals, but still have great respect. They're born a week apart back in 1987 and played 7 Grand Slam finals against each other. And I just think the mutual respect is there. And I think Andy will be able to speak his mind. And I think Djokovic wouldn't have it any other way. So they may occasionally butt heads or have some honest disagreements, but I think Djokovic will always respect Murray's point of view. And to get back to David Z's point, the later rounds, it's really, to me, it's true, it's the top 10 guys, but it's largely about Sinner and Alcaraz, because Djokovic really, if you look at the year, despite the results not being what he wanted, you still think of him as the third best. I at least do. After Sinner and Alcaraz, he still won the Olympic gold. He still is Novak Djokovic. So I feel like Murray's in a great position to give him just that little extra push that could get him that 25th major. And I suspect they'll make a strong bid in Australia. And I hope they continue, by the way, because the word was that they'd work through the Australian. I hope it's a year-long association and partnership, because there's a lot that could be accomplished.
Yeah, we'll see how that all flows. There's two other coaching changes that I want to talk about, and all three that we've talked about they're all linked. The next one is Hubert Hurkacz hires Yvonne Lendl and Nicholas Massou. Lendl used to coach Andy Murray, so there's that one as well. Steve, you want to touch on that one?
Yeah, I mean, I think Hubie needed to hear another voice, and I feel like he's made it. That's going to be an interesting partnership, because I think Lendl will have that big picture overview that commands the respect. Everybody knows how well he did with Murray, and I feel like then Massou will be more the COO versus the CEO, and I feel like it should work pretty well. And I suspect that Lendl and Massou will talk a lot. Lendl won't travel as much. I see that one also being a smart move from Hubie.
David?
It's interesting. I think it's a great decision to Steve's point. Hubie had been with Craig Boynton for a long time, and they probably maximized, what they were able to achieve together. I think Hubie got to a career high ranking of 6 in the world this year. Best Grand Slam performance was in Australia, reaching the quarterfinals, where he had a tough match with Medvedev. So I think it's a great move. I'm just curious, what how much can Hubie do beyond the sort of career high ranking of 6, right? We know the serve is a massive weapon of his, the agility's there, the speed, forehand's kind of an area that's let him down a little bit on big points. So I'm really curious whether it's Masu from a day-to-day standpoint or Lendl, with the bigger picture, as Steve said. Curious what they can get out of him, in the coming weeks and months.
The last one that I want to talk about is the biggest wild card for me, and the one I'm probably most excited to see how it develops is Elena Rybakina hiring Goran Ivanisevic. And Goran was recently with Novak. Again, all three of these are connected in some way, shape, or form. Rybakina, no one's ever questioned her level of tennis. When she's out there and she's healthy and she's in good frame of mind, I mean, she's as good as there is out there. I cannot wait to see how that develops. I hope it's very successful. I hope Rybakina has a really great 2025 and she's happy out there. David, I'll start with you on this one. How do you think that one's going to go?
I think it's all between the ears with Rybakina. Her game has always been, ever since she sort of rose to the occasion with her Wimbledon victory a few years back, I think her game has never been in question. The serve, the forehand, the baseline play. I think really it's going to be, can she stay healthy? That's priority number one. And then what can Goran get out of her that is going to allow her to, win those tight matches against, the Iga Swiatek's, the Arina Sabalenkas of the world. We saw Rybakina come back, I believe, at the WTA finals this year. She kind of wasn't in the best of match shape because she hadn't played in a while. So too small of a sample size in terms of recent performances. But I think Goran can help her, sort of get back to that level and also, I think, get her to another major victory.
Steve?
Yeah, I think that's entirely possible that he could get her a major this year. Sabalenka, we know that there are times she's more emotionally stable than other times. She's a great competitor. She's established herself as the best. Iga's trying to come back from her difficulties, and I feel like it is an opportunity for Goran to really make an impact. And where he made the biggest impact in the past with his players was on the serve. He helped Novak a lot with his serve, and he did it with Marin Cilic when Cilic won the 2014 U.S. Open. So I feel like that's an area, that's his specialty. We know that Goran is one of the great servers of all time. And I feel like he got a lot of, it probably did him a lot of good to have those years with Novak. But I feel at this point, Goran is really very comfortable as a coach and in the coaching box. And so I just hope the key, I think, will be that Rybakina is able to play regularly again, which she didn't do this year. Pulled out of a lot of tournaments. We don't even know all the reasons why, but my hope now is that she's feeling good about herself again, ready to compete on a regular basis. If so, decent chance she wins a major this year. And I would suspect it would be a second Wimbledon is her best chance.
Yeah, I think you're right on that. Let's all hope that she's healthy and she can play consistently throughout the year. We know her level that she can get to when she is playing well. All right. The tough part of the podcast is next. We want to do it. We want to hit on it, and then we want to move on. Is the investigations, the suspensions that everyone's in the news. Unfortunately, they're two of top players on both tours, right? Iga Swiatek was most recently in the news. We can get into as much specifics as you want. We can keep it high level. Leave it up to both of you. And then obviously Jannik Sinner, again, top ranked on the men's side. He was in the news too. I think the process itself to the public is the most frustrating part. There doesn't seem to be a lot of consistency. Simona Halep had something. And I know each case, it's case by case. Simona Halep is basically 2 years of her career. There's also lower ranked players that don't have the resources that the top ranked players can do, as hiring attorneys and whatnot. Steve, I guess I can start with you. Talk a little bit about it if you want, and hopefully this somehow in the future gets cleared up, whether transparency-wise or something where there's a little bit more trust throughout this whole process.
Sure. No, I mean, you summed it up well. I think Iga's case is it caught us all off guard. We were all a bit shocked to get that news, and then once again it turns out where things get complicated is that she knew. She basically was serving part of her suspension when we had been told that she was leaving the tour for personal reasons. I mean, she had a right to do that, but that complicated matters. I hope they resolve hers quickly. It appears to be quite similar to Sinner's in the sense that there was a trace amount or whatever she took. It does not sound like somebody deliberately trying to break the rules. And frankly, just like with Sinner, I don't believe that's who she is. But I hope they can resolve hers faster than Sinner, because let's face it, it goes back to Indian Wells last year. The 2 tests right around Indian Wells. So he was carrying this around with him all summer long. It may have contributed to some of his losses in the middle of the year at the French and Wimbledon. We'll never know. But suddenly the news breaks right before the Open, and he thinks he might be in the clear. And then we get WADA coming in and appealing. So that now we're going to wait until after the Australian, I hear. Is that initially I thought they would decide that case prior to the Australian. Now it looks like they're going to wait until after. It's a lot of wait. You mentioned, David, about the public, but what's it like on these players? It's not a fair system to them either. I think there's got to be a smoother way, a more efficient process, so that players are told quickly and it's resolved. If there's going to be an appeal, that appeal doesn't drag on for months. I mean, WADA came in, I guess, 5 weeks after the Open, whatever it was. That's a long time then to decide the appeal when all the facts are known. So I just hope that in both cases they can be cleared, and it proves that nobody's trying to play favorites, and the top players. I mean, we've seen it now in a bunch so many times with Halep and Sharapova. Now these two, that the testing is fair in the sense that they are willing to penalize top players, but I don't think the players should have to go through such a unnecessarily long process.
David?
Yeah, to build on that, I think there's obviously a piece of this where it's a bit coincidental that we're giving this a lot of oxygen because it's the top players on both tours, right? If this were happening at lower levels, if we didn't have the comparisons to Halep and Sharapova, where that had very material impacts on their careers, maybe we wouldn't be having this discussion. But frankly, I'd be remiss if I didn't say that, this really, to me, doesn't feel like a lot of new. And whether it's tennis or whether it's other forms of international sport, these sort of nuanced gray areas around doping and testing and enforcement, and even within the Swiatek and Sinner examples where she's got contaminated melatonin from the supplier that she purchased it from, versus Sinner where there was some malpractice, if you will, by the team around him, even to already very different circumstances. So I think it's just unfortunate because it's putting a bit of a black mark on not just the sport, but on two of the sport's best players and marketers. And, frankly, to Steve's point around hoping that this all gets resolved and that everyone's cleared, I would love to share that optimistic view, but I don't think it's going to work out that great for Sinner. Iga quietly served this 1 month suspension, and if she got a month for sort of what I view as less wrongdoing than the Sinner case, I think we're looking at, Sinner plays the Australian Open, right? Because that's obviously timeline-wise, before the case and the appeal. But I think we're looking at a Sinner suspension next year. I really do. I hope it's somewhere in the neighborhood of maybe a couple months so that it doesn't totally catapult his season. But I wouldn't be shocked if they give him 6 months after the WADA appeal in February. And, I think timeline-wise, he'd miss the clay and the grass court season. So I hope I'm wrong, but I think there's going to be some more meddling, and I think we haven't heard the last of this story.
You could well be right. And I don't mean to say that I'm convinced that he's going to get cleared, but I feel like, let's face it, just a quick comment off of yours is that WADA was asking for a year to 2 years. So right. I know you're saying 6 months, David, and I feel like that considering what he's been through already, that'd be a pretty severe punishment. And ideally, there would be none at all, given that it was his team that was responsible. But 6 months at this stage could wreck his 2025 in many ways. So I hope that you're wrong as well.
Yeah, I think a lot of tennis fans hope that David's wrong on that, but we'll see how that all develops. Okay, I want to get past the negative stuff and let's talk about more good stuff here. Novak Djokovic, and I know a lot of people probably thinking, you know what, 2025 could probably be his last year. He's probably going to shoot for, another slam maybe. That's what he's going to gear his schedule on. I'll start with you, David. One, do you think he gets one more slam? And two, if he's healthy and he's playing a very high level, maybe he doesn't get a slam, maybe he makes two finals of a slam, maybe he comes up just short. If he's healthy, are you convinced that 2025 is Novak's last year?
I'll tackle that in a couple parts. I'll say to your question around him winning a slam this year, I'm going to give him a yes. I'll give you a yes on that. And I think you can't answer this question in a vacuum. I think in some ways the conversation we just had around what may happen with Sinner, some of the Alcaraz inconsistencies in his form that we saw last year, playing a pretty busy exhibition schedule. I think those are things that are going to help just increase by default the probability of Novak's chances, but more to Novak specifically. Look, I think he's doing all the right things, right? He's talked about prioritizing his schedule. He's not going to play the full calendar. He's going to focus on peaking for the majors. And at the same time, I really like his decision to play Brisbane ahead of the Australian Open because Novak is a guy who I still think needs matches and needs confidence, right? When did he play his best stretch of tennis last year over the summer heading into the Olympics? He had, I think it was four matches under his belt, albeit with injury from the French Open, where he built some confidence, winning 4 or 5 setters. Wimbledon obviously got 7 matches in, won 6 of them to get confidence leading into that final, and that really catapulted him to what was an amazing performance at the Olympics. So I think the key for him is building confidence and maintaining that hunger, right? To the last part of your question around prospects for potential retirement after this year, depending on how the season goes. I think the Novak case study is a little bit different than what we've seen with the other 2 members of the big 3 who retired, right? Roger and Rafa more recently were pretty outspoken about the fact that they didn't necessarily want to leave. It's their bodies that didn't allow them to continue playing on the tour. And I think for Novak, obviously barring something unforeseen or if this knee injury continues to lag on, I think that if Novak leaves the tour, it won't be because his body let him down. I think it'll be because the hunger and, the emotional piece that he puts into this sport won't be there anymore for him. That's how I feel. I don't know, Steve, if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, it's that's very sound analysis. I feel like Djokovic, I mean, the hiring of Murray tells me that the motivation level has increased and that he looks back on this year and he's thrilled that he got that Olympic gold medal and that he played one of his best matches in recent years to beat Alcaraz in a pair of tie breaks to get it. But otherwise, a little frustrating, getting hurt at the French, as you mentioned, meant that he didn't even lose there, but he had to do the surgery, come back in a hurry and gets to the final of Wimbledon. And then the Olympics, I think, cost him the U.S. Open in a lot of ways because I think at that stage he was a little drained. And that's why he lost early at the Open. But no, I feel like I heard Jim Courier say on Tennis Channel that he would be shocked if Djokovic didn't win one next year. I thought that was interesting. I would go almost that far. I wouldn't be shocked, but I'd be very, very surprised because of the fact that he is such a strong contender at every single major. The history in Australia with 10 titles, winning 2 of his 3 French Opens in the last 4 years. The great record at Wimbledon with 7 titles and a little underperforming at the U.S. Open where he's got 4. All those surfaces, all those situations he excels in. He should have 4 really good cracks as long as that knee does hold up. That's my only concern is that I felt like he continued to wear that sleeve. It's a precautionary thing. It didn't prevent him from playing splendidly at the Olympics. But I think the best sign would be if he was able to play without it. It's going to be very interesting to see how he looks in Brisbane leading up to Australia and where he is on the physical scale. As far as the retirement part, I feel like if he gets that 1 or somehow pulls off 2 this year, the motivation may be gone and he may feel like, look, I want to spend – this is it now. I've done enough. I made the comeback. I passed Margaret Court. I have nothing left to play for. So I do think there's a decent chance if he gets that 25th major this year, he does retire.
Great analysis from both of you. Thanks for that. Steve, I'm going to stick with you on this topic. The U.S. men, Taylor, Francis, Tommy, and Ben. I mean, it was a great year, and you highlighted by the U.S. Open. We had, as we mentioned with Mary Jo Fernandez a few weeks back on pod. I mean, you go to the women and the men. We had half of the semifinals field on both sides. I want to stick with the men. 2024 was a very, very good year. Do you think that is their peak on what they can do during the year, or do you think there's room that there may be multiple people in finals throughout the year, and maybe we'll pop one of these one day and get one?
Yeah, I hate to. That's such a difficult question. I feel like Fritz got to number 4, which was higher than many of us thought was possible. I tipped my hat to him to reach his first major final, first Grand Slam final in New York, and lose that to Sinner, and then lose to Sinner in Turin in the year-end championships. Those were 2 remarkable achievements. Great year all around. I think he's staying in that territory of 4 to 6, 4 to 7 in the world. Maybe hard to stay at 4. And I think you'll see Shelton climbing. I don't know what to expect from Tiafoe. Tommy Paul could make a move. But whether we're going to see, whether it's going to be better than this year, I think it's going to be comparable. I think Fritz could be back in another major final. I think Paul might sneak one in somewhere. Shelton is the one that I'm most fascinated by, who has the greatest capacity for improvement. And he took a lot of lumps this year, but he also played a lot of great tennis. And a match like the Tiafoe match at the Open that he lost in 5, if he wins that, who knows if Ben isn't back in the semifinals again as he had been the year before. So I'm optimistic about that group. Whether they can move beyond where they are now, I'm not sure. But I have to say, I also didn't think Fritz would get to 4 in the world. I really am impressed with the hard work and strides that he made. And so it makes me, I'm definitely feel there'll be a presence. No doubt there'll be a presence in 25. I don't think any of them are going to win majors if you pin me down.
David?
I'm smiling because I'm in complete lockstep with Steve on this one. I think what that cohort was able to accomplish this year, namely, with Fritz leading the way, was more probably than we could have imagined for this group. And I think it also elevated, to your point, David, around the conversation with Mary Jo and throughout the year, it elevated American tennis to points where it hadn't been for quite some time, right? In terms of top 5 in the rankings, having an all American semi at the U.S. Open, those are all things that are huge positives. I think in terms of setting expectations for next year, totally agreed on Shelton having the highest ceiling. Does he reach it this upcoming year? Probably not. I think there's a much longer runway for him to achieve that potential. So not going to put a ton of pressure. At the same time, he hasn't even been on tour as long as some of the other guys. And I think it's fair to expect that at least one or multiple will be in semis of Grand Slams, right? I think when it happened a couple years back with Tommy in Australia, it could have been seen as a fluke, for instance, but I think there's some real staying power to these guys. They continue to push each other. And, on any given day, maybe minus Sinner, Alcaraz, Novak, they can beat any of those other guys who are ranked between 4 through 30 or what have you.
Well, we're in communication here with Michael Russell, so we're going to send it to Michael to use it for motivation, and maybe Taylor can pop one of these, in 2025. But yeah, no, it's great analysis. They did have a great 2024, and we'll see how it all develops in 2025. Taylor has played well in Australia in previous years. He just keeps bumping up to Novak a lot of those years, but we'll see how it develops. Okay, Sinner and Alcaraz. Let's say put the suspension possibility aside for Sinner. I want to ask, and I'll stick with you, David, to start. Who's the third player besides Novak in the short term? So you can't say Novak. Is there, when I say who is the third player, is there a third player that can really interrupt this rivalry, or maybe not interrupt is the word, join in this rivalry?
I think there could be, but I'm going to go a little bit off the board on this one, right? You got sort of the usual suspects in terms of Zverev, Medvedev, Tsitsipas, who have been knocking on the door. You had Holger Rune, who I think in a press conference or maybe through Netflix wanted to anoint himself as a member of the big three with Sinner and Alcaraz. I'm going to go with the name of Jack Draper. That's really a name that I've been watching, especially ever since his semifinal appearance at the U.S. Open, where I think, definitely physically wasn't able to compete with Sinner at the level that was required in those, both physical and emotional conditions. But I think that's a guy who's got a ton of potential. You've got the lefty aspect of it that always brings a wrinkle into play. So if you told me within the top 20 or 30, that's what I would look at. And if we're really talking long term, I think candidly the next sort of quote unquote Sinner Alcaraz. So I'm talking about the profile of a player that's going to win multiple majors, make a consistent run and number one in the world. I'm not sure that player is on our radar right now, right? You've got, I can throw out a name like a Joao Fonseca, but the guy's 18 years old, and sky's the limit, but we haven't seen the proof in the pudding. So I'll give you Jack Draper with that one, and I think long term we haven't found that player on the tour yet.
Steve?
Draper's a good choice. I would throw in one other name long term that I think impressed me a lot this year in a lot of different ways was Fees. I mean, he's got all this charisma. He's got a good all around game. He connects with the crowds. He's not afraid of the top players. I saw some real potential there too. But Draper, obviously, with that semifinal at the Open, and despite what you were saying, David, about where he was lacking in the Sinner match, but he also at times competed quite well with him, despite his physical struggles and getting sick and all of that. I mean, that serve is really devilish, and as you mentioned, the left-handedness is a big part of this equation, and therefore, I really feel like if there was going to be one shocker this year in the majors, one really surprise champion, it could be Draper at Wimbledon. Circumstances have to be right. I mean, the draw has to break. A lot of things have to happen. But if there was one really big surprise result that was not Sinner, not Alcaraz, not Djokovic, it would be that might be it. And David alluding to all those players, what worries me is Medvedev Zverev, I feel I don't know whether it's going to get any better. I felt like he had golden opportunity at the French this year, up 2-1 against Carlos in the semis, and really faded in the fourth and fifth, physically and mentally. Looked like he was very excited at the end of the third, almost thought that he had the title within his grasp, and he didn't. And, losing to Taylor Fritz at Wimbledon from 2 sets up, and losing to Medvedev from 2 sets up at the Australian in the semis, and losing to Fritz again at the Open. I worry that his ranking is misleading, and that he's a great player to be sure, but I don't know whether he's going to get any greater. So there is a chance for somebody to make a move, but I still say that the move that's going to be made is most likely going to be Djokovic reemerging after what for him was a quiet year and taking 1 or 2 of those majors.
Okay. Thank you both for that. Now we'll do some quick hitters, but we could talk about it. I mean, a little bit more than just, a simple 1 or 2 word answers. I want to start with Coco Gauff. We saw her play a very difficult. It was difficult to watch her play in the U.S. Open, losing to Emma Navarro. We saw the forehands, we saw the double faults. She had a very good fall, culminating in winning the WTA finals. And who she beat in the WTA finals was incredible. Who she beat. The deal with her, and again, she is still so young, and she's won a major. She won the 2023 U.S. Open. She just won the WTA finals. The 2 weaknesses, do you both continue to think those will get better, or do you think it's it is what it is, and she's going to handle it as best as she can, and she's going to continue an amazing career despite those 2 weaknesses? David, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I want to emphasize the part that you finished off with, which is that, in spite of all of these challenges that she's had and that we've observed, to finish the year 3 in the world, semis of Australia and Roland Garros, and then 2 tough losses to Emma Navarro, like this is nothing to shrug at in terms of her performance. I think bringing in Matt Daly into the equation, probably as her new coach, adds some upside in terms of tactical changes that can be made. And I read that the serve has been an early point of emphasis there. I don't know about the forehand, right? I think if she's ranked 3 in the world and she is getting to quarters and semis of majors, winning some of the WTA 1000 events, like I think it's very difficult to justify an overhaul of a forehand at that clip. However, she happens to have an actual down year and not what we're qualifying as a down year for her. I think there's an opportunity, but I think, if the ranking falls, then that's when the pressure comes off a little bit and it's easier to make these changes and really, try to take a big step forward. But I think for now it's minor improvements and it's staying the course and hoping that, there's also some regression to the mean with the competitors around you, like Sabalenka and like Iga, we saw a little bit of last year.
Yeah, and before I pass this on to Steve, I've always tried to communicate this well, and we've talked about this several times on the pod. When I emphasize Coco's weaknesses, that's not news to anybody, but I want to say it's almost like credit to her that she is at number 3 in the world right now. She's won a major, she's won the WTA finals. At any sport, when you get to that highest of high levels, people don't really have glaring weaknesses, and Coco does in those 2 areas. And the fact that she's overcome those and still has made those, won those big, huge events as 3 in the world is incredible. So I've always tried to, it's been frustrating for me because I don't feel like my message is always communicated clearly on that. I think it's been amazing that she's done what she's done despite having those weaknesses. Steve, I'll let you add your thoughts.
Yeah, I agree with that point. It's true. You got it. But here's the way I look at it. The summer of 23, when Brad Gilbert came aboard post Wimbledon and got her through a magnificent summer and culminating with that win at the U.S. Open, she was revitalized. Things had not been going that well for her. She hadn't been that happy with how she played the first half. It was a smart hire to bring Brad in. Then it kind of surprised me, given that Gilbert had brought her to her first major, that she parted ways with him post U.S. Open this year. So up comes Daly, and it was very similar in a way. I felt like she was revitalized again by hearing another voice. And so we saw short term that it worked. Now the question is going to be, can she sustain it this time? Because with Brad, I mean, yes, David is so right about those results were nothing to scoff at, to be in the semis of the Australian and the French, and then lose those matches to Navarro. A bit disappointing at Wimbledon, the Open, but no disgrace. And then close the year as she did with the WTA finals. The key now is going to be sustaining it. And as far as the strokes, I think there's a middle ground. I think there can be some revamping. Brad Gilbert did not believe in that, and I respect him for that. That he doesn't like tampering with his players' strokes. He wants to really keep it more strategic. But Daly might be more willing to make some minor modifications that I think could, and who knows that he hasn't done it already, because I did feel like Coco's forehand was holding up so well in the WTA finals by comparison to how it looked in the middle of the year. So I'm fascinated to see what she does in Australia, because it seems to me that's a big opportunity for her. Iga trying to recover her confidence. Swiatek is obviously one of, Sabalenka winning the last 2 years was terrific over there. She may still be the player to beat, but Coco's going to be right in the mix. So I say there can be some changes, but not to the point where she's confused and all muddled out there. She's got to go out there believing in herself, and same thing with the serve. I mean, I think he'll be tampering with the serve in a way that's not going to leave her in a confused state of mind. So I'm encouraged by how they've started, and I hope they can keep it going.
Steve, I'm going to stick with you on this one. Arina Sabalenka and Elena Rybakina. I think Sabalenka is going to have a tremendous year in 2025. And I think Iga may dip a little in 2025, but I think Sabalenka is going to win 2, maybe 3 majors in 2025. I love where she's taken her game. The wild card for me is Elena Rybakina. I think when she plays at that high level that we've seen previously, she can match Sabalenka when Sabalenka's playing very, very well.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, Steve, you think Sabalenka is going to have a monster year in 2025?
I think your call for 2 is a good call. I see it more as 2 than 3. She actually has interesting matchup problems with Coco.
Yeah.
That's what I think the women's game is so interesting right now. Coco definitely enjoys playing her. I mean, she beat her in that U.S. Open final and beat her in the year-end championships. And it's not that she's going to beat her every time out, but Coco presents problems for her, and she seems very comfortable playing Sabalenka. Rybakina can beat any of them, no doubt, but we have to sort of see her reemerge and find that level again. But I don't. I'm largely agreeing with you. Sabalenka, I don't see her settling for one major this year. She's a threat on any surface. Least likely is the French with Iga, but I mean that's going to be the key to Iga's year, by the way. Yeah. If she doesn't win the French, let's just say hypothetically she loses in the quarters or semis in Australia, and then she doesn't win the French, that would be a big blow to her. She really needs to defend that title in my mind to finish the year stronger. But Sabalenka, yeah, I say 2.
David?
I have a lot of respect for what Sabalenka has been able to accomplish over the course of 2024. And we've spent a lot of time, whether it's you guys in previous episodes or in our conversation today, talking about the top of the women's game, whether it be Iga, Coco, Rybakina, who we have a large sample size from. I don't want to discount the field. I think there's just not, as well as Sabalenka is playing, there is not a huge precedent for the kind of success that we're currently forecasting for her. Let's say the conversations around 2 majors in 2025. If we look at this upcoming Australian Open, which is gonna kick off in about a month from now, Sabalenka is a 2-time defending champion entering this Australian Open. Last time a woman won the Australian Open 3 consecutive times, Martina Hingis, 97, 98, 99. All right, something that Serena Williams wasn't even able to accomplish. So, and then she's also going for her 3rd major out of her last 5. And the last person who was able to do that was Iga, doing French, US Open French, and then Serena back in 14 and 15. So what Sabalenka is trying to accomplish has been historically very difficult to do for a lot of great WTA players. And that's why I think there's, as much as we've talked about these 3 or 4 names, and especially Sabalenka now, I think there's going to be opportunities for other women to win majors this year. And so I'll give Sabalenka 1 major in 2025. That's my prediction.
You both owe me dinner when she wins 3. Sabalenka, I hope you listen to this because
well, we have it as 3, 2, and 1. Somebody's right unless she doesn't win a major at all. But just a quick comment off of what Dave was saying. I think that there's no doubt about the history, and that's been the issue in the women's game, is the lack of continuity. You point to it with all those stats, is that there's been too much musical chairs in my view, and sometimes too many winners at the majors, which I feel like they would. But I feel like Sabalenka has moved into a phase of her career where she can do it. And as you say, 2-time defending champion Australia. She won the U.S. Open, great match with Pegula. So she won the 2 hardcourt majors this past year. So I feel like that history trend is about to change.
We'll see. All right, David, you actually brought this topic up with me months ago, so we'll start with you on this one. And Steve, you already touched on a little bit with Sasha, so we'll let you add your thoughts at the end here. But have the careers of Sasha Zverev, Stefanos Tsitsipas, and Daniil Medvedev, have they peaked? Do you think they will get better over the next few years, or do you think they've pretty much plateaued? And you could take all 3, you could take 1, you could take 2. I'll leave it up to you how you want to respond.
Yeah, I can hit on all 3 quickly. I think, to piggyback off what Steve had said earlier around Zverev in terms of sort of this, a bit of a mirage, if you will, of a career best finish of number 2 in the world at the end of the season, winning 2 Masters 1000s, being up 2-1 at Roland Garros, but at the same and seemingly playing his best tennis just in what the numbers say and the consistency of his results on tour. But at the same time, you could point to all of his Grand Slam results this year, including that French Open against Carlos, and say that it's been underwhelming and disappointing in many ways. And so I think from a level of tennis standpoint, he's probably reached his peak, right? Like he's the best mover I think we've ever seen for someone of his height in the game of tennis. He's figured out a majority of the serving yips, and his first serve continues to be massive. And the backhand's awesome, and the forehand is going to be what it's going to be. You know, in some ways, at a different scale, sort of in parallel to how we speak about Coco a little bit. I think he masks the weakness a little bit more, and he can do more with that forehand. But I think as a player, this is his ceiling. It's all up here. And for the podcast listeners, I'm pointing at the temple. It's all about, can he come up with the mental fortitude to step up when it counts the most. He wasn't able to do it against Carlos, and Carlos, being the better and more clutch player, came through at Roland Garros. Obviously, we had the COVID US Open with Team. I kind of threw that out because, you know, that was just a wild tournament and set of circumstances. But yeah, I think as a player, Zverev probably has peaked. Results, depending, you know, could be a little bit more circumstantial. Quickly on Medvedev, I think he's a little bit lost tactically, right? When Medvedev rose in 2019, 2020, 2021, had his best results, Grand Slam finals of US Open, Grand Slam finals of Australian Open. He had sort of this identity of the counter puncher, every ball comes back, and he's got a big serve to go along with it that sort of spares him a little bit. And I think he and his coach, Gilles Servara, put a lot of work into trying to play more aggressively, particularly in early rounds of tournaments, to make it less taxing, to play a slightly different brand of tennis. And I'm not sure. He's kind of like 1 foot in the door, 1 foot out the door when he's tactically playing against someone like Sinner, who he's had a lot of close matches with over the course of the last 12 to 24 months. You know, we can obviously point to the Australian Open final last year where he ran out of gas. He was being very aggressive the first couple sets, and it just didn't work out over the course of 5 sets. So I think there's a bit of an identity crisis with Medvedev. I don't think that's to say that he can't win another one, but there's some things that he needs to iron out. With Tsitsipas, look, as long as the situation with his father is in flux, you know, every few months is he on the team? Is he not on the team? Is he there but he's not the coach? Like, I can't even keep track at this point. And I feel like I'm someone who's been invested in Tsitsipas' success over the years. So Tsitsipas, I'm going to take a pulse on Tsitsipas at the end of the 2025 clay court season. Clay court is where he does best. Forehand's the biggest and the heaviest. He's had his best results on clay. I will withhold judgment on Tsitsipas until I see some clay court tennis in 2025.
Fair enough. Steve, I know you talked a little bit on Zverev already. If you want to talk on Tsitsipas and Medvedev as well.
Yeah, just a quick addition on Zverev, though. I do hold it over him, David, a bit, that loss to Team. Even though it was a crazy U.S. Open, the COVID Open, he had 2 sets to love in a break. He also served for the match in the 5th. It's another example of him not closing. It's another example of between the ears, as you were alluding to. So I just worry about him in that department. As Medvedev hasn't won a tournament now since Rome in 20. It's been over a year and a half. Rome the previous year, 23, and that was a surprise because it was on clay. He's had a lot of great performances since then. U.S. Open final in 23, Australian, what that you just mentioned, David, where it's 2 sets up on Sinner. But he's also taken it on the chin from Sinner. It wasn't a great performance at the U.S. Open. There's been other losses to Sinner where he's been beaten. To me, it could start getting to be more decisive like it was in Turin. So I just feel like I think you analyzed him well, but I worry about how he climbs out of this predicament that he's in. And he's been very willing, very open about what he's been up against and his concerns and what he's trying to do out there. But I think Carlos is just better than he is. Sinner is better than he is. A revitalized Novak is better than he is. And then there's that wider cast of players that can beat him on given days now. So I'm worried about Medvedev, whether we're ever going to see the same Medvedev that we saw from 19 through, well, let's say the early stages of this past year. It's been moving in the wrong direction. And on top of everything else, we all know he's something of a head case. He tries to stay calm, but he still implodes on the court. Tsitsipas, he needs a coach. You alluded to the father. He needs a big name coach. He needs somebody to come in there and really take charge. I thought the best couple of years back with Philippoussis was a real possibility for him. And I think maybe because they hadn't resolved the matters with his father or what his father's role was going to be, Philippoussis didn't stay in the picture, which was too bad. He was doing a good job. Because Stefanos, to me, is one of the more, despite the fact that guys can get to his backhand, has one of the best transition games and volleys better than most. And as you mentioned, that forehand on the clay can be really devastating. So I like his game. I like the fact that he hasn't given up on himself, but something has to break. And I think it has to be more than the clay, by the way, David. You're right. The clay is where he performs his best, but he needs to be making his mark elsewhere, as he did when he lost that 23 final to in Australia to Novak. So it's a very crucial year for Tsitsipas and for Medvedev. I'm not terribly optimistic about either. And I think Zverev will drop from 2 to about 4 or 5 in the world. That's my take.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. We'll see those three players as they develop not only into 2025, but 2026, 2027 and beyond, and see how it all pans out. All right, we've been going a little bit over 45 minutes. Respect the viewers' time. Before
David,
concluding,
is that your way of telling us that we better be a little bit more precise with our comments?
Not at all. Not at all. You guys have been great. I just always try to keep the year-end segments, around to that hour point, a little under. Before we conclude, I think we all want to talk a little bit more about Rafa. And Steve, you and I did our episode, when it was announced, when he announced that he was retiring, and we spent a good chunk of that episode talking about Rafa. For the viewers, I recommend going back to that, because I remember there was a stat, and I forget who put it on Twitter. I gave the person credit when I said it, but there was a stat. There was the percentages that Rafa won for every clay court event that he played throughout his career, and the numbers were staggering. The numbers were absolutely staggering. And I just add to that, and then I'm going to let you both speak as well. I'll start with David, and then we'll conclude with you, Steve. The 2017 French Open that Rafa had, and Roger Federer had some Wimbledons where he went 21 sets won, 0 sets lost. Rafa had a few 21-0s in the French Open as well. The 21 sets being you win 7 matches in a major, 3 out of 5 sets, you win 3 sets straight, you don't lose a set. In that 2017 French Open, he only lost a total of 35 games. He had 6 6-1 sets and 3 6-0 sets. No sets got past 6-4. Those numbers are just staggering to win a slam like that, even when we know how much Rafa has owned the French Open. Those numbers alone are just crazy, ridiculous. It's hard to even understand it. He's been an absolute pleasure to watch, and not only what he's done on the court, but what he stands for off the court. And, we talk about the big three all the time. 2 of them are now, officially gone. And we're going to miss them both dearly. And we still got Novak. We still got Novak hanging on. And hopefully we got some great tennis left with Novak as well. Rafa, we loved you, man. We loved you. Everybody loved you. Everybody loved watching how you competed and how you won and how you treated others. And we wish you the very best of luck the next stage of your life. Hopefully you and Roger will continue to do some cool things going forward. And Novak, whenever Novak wraps it up on his tour, hopefully the 3 of you can do something cool together, because what the 3 of them added to the game is going to be hard to be matched by any future generation. With that, David, I'll let you give your final thoughts.
Yeah, I try to stay away from hyperbole as much as possible, but I think there's a real case to be made that, from the standpoint of Rafa, whether it's as a competitor, day-to-day practice sessions, point in, point out on the court, whether it's at Roland Garros, whether it's elsewhere, I don't think we're going to see anyone like him ever. And I'm not the first person. I certainly won't be the last person to say that, especially here in the aftermath of his official retirement the last couple of weeks. You guys have both spoken about it at length, but for him to be as dominant as he was at Roland Garros, and then to isolate and completely ignore that and to look at the career that he had as the king of clay on every other surface is just, it's a testament to how he evolved as a player, right? He came on the tour, everyone saw, the big muscles, the swashbuckling, slides and passing shots, and this guy, his knees will give out because he's standing, far behind the baseline, and he's, hitting reverse forehands and, making guys' lives absolutely miserable on clay. And every single time in his career when he was challenged, when he couldn't get through Federer on the grass courts of Wimbledon after multiple attempts, when he was looking to complete the career slam at the US Open and developed a bigger serve and a more aggressive style of play, like he extracted, we talk a lot about other players maximizing their potential or peaking. You want to talk about maximizing everything? Rafael Nadal. And, it's like you said, David, he's been an absolute pleasure to watch for me. We could have never expected that, especially for me, growing up, having three, role models in the sport that I played, the sport that I loved. It's an absolute pleasure. And, you don't want to get stuck too much on the past, because I want to be optimistic about the future that's ahead for tennis. But Rafa will be dearly missed. It was a little bit sad just that it ended on sort of a sleepy Tuesday night at a Davis Cup tie that, frankly, don't think it meant a whole lot. Besides those guys that were on the court. But everything he said in his post-match address to the crowd, it was just an embodiment of who he was as a competitor, who he is as a person. And, we'll miss him, and I hope we see him around. We've seen Roger here and there, whether it's sponsor engagements or, coming to some of the tournaments. I hope that Rafa gets that, that the famous ceremony that Amelie Mauresmo wanted to do for him at Roland Garros last year that we didn't see after he lost to Zverev. I hope he comes back next year and they, send him off the way that, that he deserves and the way that he's earned it.
Steve, I'll let you end with it.
Yeah, David has done a superb job of summing up Rafa's attributes. I just want to talk a little bit about the evolution, because we know that incredible win at the 2005 French Open, when he got things started and took over that tournament. I mean, that player, it took him a while to evolve on hard courts, to evolve on the grass, but so quickly, by 2006, he was in the finals of Wimbledon against Roger, which shocked a lot of people. And by 2007, he's taking Roger to 5, and then he wins it in 2008. Took him a bit longer in terms of the Australian and US Opens to find his footing on the hard, but he broke through at the Australian in 2009 with that 5-set win over Roger, and he gets his first US Open in 2010 the following year. So I just look at all that and say, okay, he would not be satisfied to just be regarded as the greatest clay court player of all time. He wants to be known for his flexibility, versatility, professionalism on all surfaces, and the work that he put in to make himself the player that he was on those other surfaces. So for the fact that Rafa would end up with 4 US Opens, 2 Australians, the only thing he didn't achieve that would disappoint him a bit, but it's not a major wart on his record, was not winning the year-end championships, the ATP finals. Indoors was his toughest. Fast indoor courts were the toughest transition for him. He didn't like playing indoors as much, but what I loved was he was always looking for ways to improve, and he did become. Just look at the footage of his serve from the early stages of his career. Look at it in 2005. Look at it in 2010. Then look at it again in the later years, and you'll see some serious changes. And Moya made some changes there as well with the toss, and so that he was always a work in progress. And as you said, David, I mean, I think the key is week in, week out, tournament in, tournament out, there was no better competitor. Djokovic was the best clutch competitor, best big occasion player for pulling out the tightest matches against his biggest rivals. He exceeded Roger and Rafa. But Rafa, there just was never he never let his guard down, no matter where he was playing his entire career, and never. You just did not see him tank. You didn't see him. He was unwavering and unswerving. And that's what I will think about when I think back on him. Those are the words that will always spring to mind the first.
No, what a great way to end this episode, talking about Rafa's accolades, both on and off the court. I appreciate you both, your thoughts on him, and we did it, guys. We did another year. It goes quickly, but this was fun because the three of us actually got together a few times over the course of the year in person. So hopefully we get to do that again next year going forward. And big thank you to both of you guys doing this with me every year. Steve, again, I say it every year, but people, especially my wife, think you're crazy for still hanging with me every week and doing these. But it's been a ton of fun, guys. So I appreciate it. I wish you both a very happy new year, health, happiness to both your families, yourself personally, professionally, all the above. Thank you, guys. This was fun.
Thank you, David. Appreciate it, and always great chatting with you, Steve, as well.
Same here, David, and enjoyed it a lot. That was a good thorough. I hope the listeners enjoyed it as much as we did participating in it.
Thanks, guys.